Hey guys.
Hey, Rabbi, good morning.
Good morning. All right, so first we're going to look at the language of the mitzvah again, and then we'll look at a couple of things that I looked at about the Zav. Specifically, what we're going to look at is just the subject of whether anybody thinks that the Zav is like the Metzorah. The Metzorah has some kind of a skin issue, which is the signal that they have a tzarat, and then they have to go through a whole series of steps. Eventually, when they are cured, they can sort of re-enter their relationship, their natural relationship with people. And there's an assumption that they've done something wrong in their past. That's why they are a Metzorah. And the similar language, it seems like a similar language is written about the Zav. And especially that language of kapara, that word kapara, which sounds like atonement. It sounds like there might have been an assumption that they also did something wrong, and that's why they're getting it. So first, we're gonna go back just to look at the language again of our mitzvah, and then we'll look at I don't have a ton on this because there for some reason isn't a ton available on it. I mean, or at least not where I'm thinking of looking. There might be stuff, but I'm not. That is that he commanded us that any man who's healed from a discharge have to offer sacrifice. This is the sacrifice of the Zav, and he is lacking full atonement until he offers it. And that is his, may he be exalted, and may his name be a blessing, saying, when one with a discharge become clean of his discharge, on the 8th day he shall take 2 turtle doves, etc. And then you have the Zava, the same kind of thing with the woman who is classified as a Zava. That is that he commanded us that any woman who's healed from a discharge offer a sacrifice, and that is 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. This sacrifice of the Zava, and she is lacking full atonement until she offers it. So this language of atonement, which in the Hebrew is kapara. I don't know what he wrote in the Arabic, but in the Hebrew, the word is kapara. That is used in case of both of these. So the question is, why do they need atonement? They are not bringing it isn't characterized like with a sin offering. It actually uses the word sin, and but here it is using the word atone, kapara. Right, so let's go now. I'm gonna go. Hey, Estelle. Good to see you, good to see your avatar. So what we're gonna do. This is just the Wikipedia page about the Zav. And so in the first section, it says, in Jewish ritual law, a Zav is a man who's had an abnormal seminal discharge from his male sexual organ and thus entered a state of ritual impurity. A woman who's had a similar abnormal discharge from her genitals is known as a zova. Again, she's bleeding from her womb. He is got some, they're just trying to explain why they are using the same word. So they're suggesting it's because it comes from the area of her genitalia and his genitalia, although that's still, distant. All right. Purification requirements of the Zav, including counting 7 days without a seminal discharge, immersion in a spring, and bringing certain korban out. In the realm of Tuma and Tahara law, the Zav has the ability to create a midras and is prohibited from entering specific areas of the Temple Mount. A midras means if he walks over or sits on something, it can become tameh. All right. In
Rabbi,
the etymology, go ahead.
I have a question. This obsession almost with bodily fluids that we get once we get to the Leviticus or something like that, the priesthood, we don't see anything like in Bereshis about that. You know what I mean? And there's holiness and they do this, but there doesn't seem to be any connection to that kind of thing until we get to priests, and right?
Let me just think. So they would have been Nida. So we don't see anything. I mean, obviously the red tent, they want to associate that with Anita Diamant in her book. It has to do with Rachel and Leah, etc. But there is one reference when Rachel is on the camel, and she doesn't. Yeah. I mean, she doesn't. It doesn't say anything about holiness, though. It just it references that, and they would have. I mean, menstruation would have existed. But it does seem to be a nod to menstruation. But as you're pointing out, not that a woman who's menstruating would have some kind of spiritual taboo. There didn't seem to be that, or a man. We also don't see anything about leprosy, tzara'at either, but anything about, or spitting comes up with in last week's Torah portion with Miriam, because he says if she spat in her father. There references spitting. We've had in the laws, we have all manner of issues with discharge. What about urinating or defecating? Is there any mention? There is something about Paro going down to the Nile, but it doesn't say in the text that he's going to urinate or defecate. Does it even talk about that? Any bodily discharge? Is there any? We have it later on in the laws. About if you're in the army, you are supposed to not defecate in the camp. You're supposed to go outside of the camp to defecate. But what about up until the Torah is given? Is there any story that includes anything about anything to do with bodily discharges? Just no, even going to the bathroom. It's not interesting. Yeah, so we do have that nod to menstruation, but really no focus at all on what's going out of your body. We do have a discussion about stuff going in your body, but not stuff coming out of your body of any type. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Why would that be? All right, that's a good subject. Not a popular one to discuss. Imagine somebody became famous for this topic.
Yes.
He is the world's expert on bodily discharge and halacha.
Strangely, years and years ago, David and I Remember? I mean, this is before we learned anything. We picked up something to learn, and the first thing we read was a Zav in his pouch.
Seriously.
Yeah, what, right, David? I don't know what that was.
This is what's known as toiling through Torah.
It's what, Torah?
The subject, the better.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so so I just didn't want to.
Rabbi, I've been meaning
Yeah.
to tell you this for a few days, but I didn't know when the opportunity was going to be there. But I just want to let you know, when you talk about Zav in a male, okay, and they talk about it's gonorrhea, there is something else called these days called non-gonococcal urethritis, where you have inflammation of the urethra, okay, that that is cultured and is not gonorrhea. But
So
it does.
Does it have
cause,
a discolored?
Yes,
Is it slightly
yes.
discolored? The discharge.
Well, that's how you know. So
Okay.
basically, if a male comes into a clinic and has, discharge, white or yellow, that goes on for a while, then you probably have to work him up and make sure it's either, if it's not gonorrhea, which it probably may not be, then there's other things that it could be chlamydia, and other types of viruses or bacteria.
Right.
But
So it would be
they
better
put
just
them
to
under
say-
as they put them under non-gonococcal urethritis, which causes symptoms. So these people could also have non-gonococcal urethritis.
Right. Right. It was something like gonorrhea, we'll call it gonorrhea, something like that. All right. So in rabbinic literature, this is the part I wanted, viewed as divine punishment. I don't want it to be divine punishment. I'm just interested in, since it uses the word kapara, it's not like I'm pushing it for it to be a divine punishment. Just it uses that word kapara. So in what sense does it mean kapara, which usually means atonement? So viewed as divine punishment. Ibn Ezra notes that the Torah requirement of bringing a sin offering upon the completion of 7 clean days is an indication that the Zav committed a sinful act that incurred his Zav status. So Ibn Ezra is a scholar from the 1100s, and he is saying this. He doesn't apparently, this is in his commentary on the Torah. Oh, darn, I didn't want to go there. Go back. This is in his commentary on the Torah. It says, if you go to 12 here, Ibn Ezra on Leviticus 15:13, which is where the Zav is. Similarly, Chizkiyahu ben Manoach, who's also called the Chizkuni. So he is living in the 1200s. We looked him up yesterday. So he writes that the textual order of the Zav's laws near those of Tzarat and Me'ilah demonstrate that Zav status is incurred by a lack of earnestness to God and some kind of sin. The Shach, who is in the 1600s and is most famous for his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, he writes that is a consequence of excessive indulgence in physical relations that take place in the laying position. Thus, as consequence, items the Zav will lay upon will become impure for the duration of the Zav state. So it's excessive indulgence in intimacy is according to the Shach. But you see, there are a couple of people who seem to see this as connected to something that was sinful, like they take for granted with the Metzorah. All right, so now I just want to go. All right, let's just look here for a second. It's a long thing. This is an overview on Sefer Vayikra. That it's at a site called Ner LaElef. Almost all of these were written by Rabbi Avram Edelstein, who was just a phenom when it comes, and he just couldn't help himself. So in his section about korbanot, about the offerings, he talks all about different aspects of them. And at one point he gets to kapara. That's our word. When a man, so I'm just gonna read a little bit, like a little taste of his thing. When a man reaches into his spiritual core, when he's called the greatest of names given to a man, Adam, and through this brings himself or others close to God, this is called korban la Hashem, a korban to God. There is another way, however, for those who do not achieve this, who fall short and transgress. Through the korbanos, he can get back to his level of greatness. So these offerings are offered because of some mistake we made, but they also could be, even if we didn't make any mistake, korbanot have the potential to bring us to the highest levels of contact with God. When a person sinned, there are special korbanos which brought atonement. Atonement is a remarkable thing. It means that the person is not only forgiven for the sin, but that he gets rid of any of the spiritual blemish on his heart and soul, which the sin might have caused. Atonement means that a person is not stuck with the negative spiritual legacy of his past, that he can truly make a fresh start, he or she. This is quite amazing. A man kills another man. He regrets this and does tshuva. The Beis Din is clearly instructed to put him to death despite his tshuva, for the life he took cannot be returned, as the Yerushalmi puts it. Prophecy was asked, what is the punishment of the sinner? And prophecy answered, the sinning soul should die. The consequences of his actions are not undone by the tshuva, and so surely the blemish on his soul is fixed. And yet the Torah tells us that a korban undoes all this at some level. Obviously, the Torah, whose whole purpose is to correct and complete man, wanted the transgressor to have a way out. Korbanos are not the only type of atonement. There's also Yom Kippur, suffering, exile, and even death, all coming as atonement for various things. There was a clear hierarchy of atonement depending on the sin. To some degree, tshuva itself is a kapara. Again, kapara is that term, atonement. The Day of Atonement is Yom HaKippurim. It is vast. It is vast in the range of sins which it covers, and tides one over with a partial kapara until further atonement can take place. Then he goes on. The kaparot of each korban were very precise, requiring different korbanot for different actions and even for different types of people. Moreover, a person was given a choice of animal to reflect his personality and character makeup. Okay, all right. So that was just a little bit about the general notion of it. But now
you didn't say that you didn't say that the korban can annul the death penalty, right?
No, it cannot. It cannot. But it in other words, for that person, the actual death penalty will be their kapara. So that's like when he was saying different things have different korbanot. But as you pointed out, yes, the death penalty. It wouldn't help if that person brought a korban. Okay, so now I'm sharing with you another in a series of discussions with Chat GPT. So first I asked Chat GPT to explain the biblical zav and zava. So it said, in biblical terms, zav and zava are Hebrew words that refer to specific conditions of bodily discharge mentioned in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. These conditions are associated with ritual impurity and the need for purification rituals. A zav, who's a man is a man who experienced abnormal genital discharge. This discharge could be an indication of a medical condition or an irregularity. According to Leviticus 5:2-15, a zav is considered ritually impure. He must undergo a purification process involving immersion in a mikvah, a ritual bath, and waiting until evening. A zava is a woman who experiences abnormal uterine bleeding outside of a regular menstrual cycle. Leviticus 15:19-30 describes the regulations regarding the impurity and purification rituals for a zava. Similar to a zava must immerse in a mikvah and wait for evening for purification. In truth, in the Torah, it talks about it as spring water. I don't know what happens if you don't live near a spring. I guess you would go. A mikvah is slightly different than spring water. Spring water is flowing water. A mikvah is still water. All right. These conditions and the associated purification rituals were specific to the religious practices and cultural norms of ancient Israel as outlined in the Torah. It's important to note that these regulations are not observed in contemporary Judaism or Christianity. All right. Both the Zav and Zava bring offerings, korbanot. One goal of their offerings is kapara, which is generally translated as atonement. Why do the Zav and Zava require atonement? Chat GPT. In the biblical context, the requirement of an offering korbanot by a Zav and a Zava was not necessarily because they committed a sin or moral wrongdoing. The purpose of the offerings, including the concept of kapara or atonement, was primarily related to the ritual impurity associated with their conditions. In the Hebrew Bible, ritual impurity was a state that required purification before a person could participate in certain sacred activities or enter specific areas of the sanctuary. The discharge experienced by a Zav or Zava rendered them ritually impure, temporarily restricting their involvement in communal worship. So what ChatGPT is suggesting is that the word atonement here it is fixing their condition, and their condition is less than ideal because they can't interact with in the Beit HaMikdash, and they can't eat sacrificial food or truma or things like that. So they are temporarily restricted in their involvement in communal worship. So these korbanos are going to fix that, and the word kapara is like a borrowed term. So whereas kapara in other circumstances might mean that you have to fix a problem of sin, here it's talking about fixing a circumstance, which also the problem of sin would cause you to be distant from God, let's say, or distant from. So you're bringing the korban to bring you closer to God. That's the kapara. Kapara doesn't necessarily have to mean sin, that there was a sin involved. The offerings made by a Zav and a Zava were part of the process of achieving ritual purification, restoring their ability to participate fully in religious activities. The act of bringing an offering was a way for them to engage in a prescribed ritual that symbolized their desire to return to a state of purity and to be reconciled with God and the community. While the term kapara is often translated as atonement, in this context, it represents a restoration of ritual purity rather than a moral or ethical reconciliation. The offerings were seen as a means of reestablishing harmonious relationships with God within the framework of the religious practices of that time. So, whereas if you had sinned, you would feel that you need a reconciliation or reestablishment of a harmonious relationship. So to here, where you're impure, you would symbolically, it would seem like you're reestablishing a harmonious relationship with God. So,
Rabbi, when they do the, is it the chicken that they put above their head and they swing it around and around? Is that kapara?
It's actually called kaparis. Yeah, it's actually the same word. Now, the origins of that are shrouded in mystery. That custom that is certainly not a sacrifice. And if people,
they kill it afterwards, don't they?
Yeah, but not in any ritual way. I mean, it's the kosher way, but not it is not part of what we would call a sacrifice. In Israel, I thought my kids would love this. I thought, you know how lahavdil, there are people that every year they go to like a Christmas tree farm, and they get the tree and then they strap it onto the top of their car and then they drive it back. It's many a Christmas movie had that involved in it. So I figured lahavdil elef alfei havdalos, I'll have this kind of family ritual where we'll go and do kaparas, and then take the chicken to be shechted by a shoichet, and then take the shechted chicken to this orphanage in the Geula section or Mea Shorim section of Jerusalem. You could go from one to the other. This actually was in the Bukharian section, which is right near Mea Shorim and Geula. So you could, there were places that had the chicken. You'd buy the chicken. You shlug kaparas, as they say. You do the kaparas thing, then you'd bring it to a shoichet. He would shecht it for you, and then you take it. You'd actually like carry the shechted bird like a couple blocks to this orphanage, and then they would, they'd cook it for the meal for that day. So I thought they would love that. We did it one time, and they never wanted to do it again. I don't understand that. But anyways, if somebody would think that actually is some kind of a sacrifice, and that this is a fulfillment of sacrifice in our day, which you could when you look at it, then this would be considered extremely problematic by rabbis, because we do not do sacrifice nowadays. The only place to do sacrifice is in the Beit HaMikdash, and we're not doing sacrifice in Beit HaMikdash. So, but I agree that it sort of looks like it. Okay, so now I ask, do you know of any commentary which considers the Zav or Zava to have sinned, and therefore their offering is actually atoning for sin? Chat GPT. While the majority of biblical commentaries and scholars interpret the offerings of the Zav and Zava as primarily for ritual purification rather than atonement for sin, there have been some interpretations throughout history that attribute a sin-related aspect to the offerings. One such interpretation is found in the commentary of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a prominent 19th century Jewish commentator. Rabbi Hirsch suggests that the discharge experienced by a Zav and Zava was due to a neglect or transgression of the laws of family purity, which are related to marital relations and the menstrual cycle. In this understanding, their condition was seen as a consequence of violating these laws, and their offerings were seen as a form of atonement for that sin. It's important to note that Rabbi Hirsch's interpretation represents a specific viewpoint and may not be universally accepted. Interpretations of biblical texts can vary among commentators and scholars, and multiple perspectives exist on various topics. So that was my conversation with ChatGPT, which did elicit that Rav Shem Shafal Hirsch, which was not there in the Wikipedia thing. I did a search. I did try to find other more learned articles on this specific subject, but I was having trouble finding, other than these sources, I was having trouble finding it, which suggests to me that it is not common to hear somebody say that it is atonement for some kind of sin. Which when the question first came up, I also, like when we were just doing this, I also was I was sort of scanning my mind to try to think, have I ever heard anybody make a point about that with these, which they do to such a degree with the Mitzvot. And here you have similar language. But I didn't remember it. And as I'm doing a search, it's hard to find one. And even, again, take this, for what it's worth, but even ChatGPT was saying, like in the review of the different opinions here, they were saying that it's the majority of biblical commentators and scholars interpret the offerings as ritual purification, and it's sort of borrowing of the term.
Rabbi, are they saying in English here that the sin was either adultery or having intercourse during the time she's having her period? Is that what they're saying?
That's what Rav Shimshon Hirsch seems to be saying. That's how. Let's see here. The language was, Rabbi Hirsch suggests that the discharge experience was due to a neglect or transgression of the family laws of purity.
Right. That's so. Is that
not adultery? Not adultery. But,
all right?
yeah, nida. It could be nida.
Right.
And we saw before that from the Wikipedia article in the name of the Shach and the Chizkuni. Who was the other one? Yeah. We had the Ibn Ezra, the Chizkuni, and the Shach. So the Ibn Ezra and the Chizkuni are only quoted as just saying they've done something wrong. Didn't say what. And the Shach was the one who said for excessive indulgence in physical relations, which by that they mean intimacy. So none of those are like actual breaking of laws necessarily. It could be indulgence or no. It does say, the Ibn Ezra says they committed a sinful act, or at least that's how he's quoted. They committed some kind of sinful act. In the way they quote the Chizkuni, it's lack of earnestness to God and sin. So they are talking about sin. The Shach is more about just too much intercourse. And the Rosh Shafal Hirsch was stuff to do with the menstrual cycle, possibly. Okay, so that was just to follow through on this.
Rabbi, Hirsch,
Yeah.
I wonder if you're going to associate like Sarat with Lashon Hara, or you associate this with something, how does psychologically don't you associate other sicknesses with some kind of doing something wrong? I
agree. And in the past, when we've gotten to those parshas, I've tried to talk about that, especially when AIDS came out. What I would say to let's say a frum person who wants to jump to that conclusion, what I would say to them is that you, unless you are a prophet, you don't know why something happened to somebody. And you don't even have a trail of scholarship that you can rely on when it comes to the AIDS thing. You see what you believe is a causal connection, but the problem with causal connections is many times it can look like a causal connection, and it could just be a juxtaposition. It's not a cause, but a coincidence.
Right. Yeah, I don't think
So,
a learned, someone really learned would maybe make that
No.
jump, but psychologically people could, right?
Right, but I could see it happening. I could see somebody even encouraging it. This is one of those. It makes people nervous, but the Gemara in Brachos suggests that when somebody's suffering, your first thought should be, "What have I done to bring about this suffering?" This is different than the attitude we're supposed to have towards others. We're not supposed to do this with others, but we are encouraged to do this with ourselves. It only works if it can be done in a healthy way, which is a person could criticize themselves in a way that will be constructive. not as part of some kind of self-loathing, but just in a pragmatic way. So we're encouraged when something happens to us that makes us uncomfortable or causes us pain. We're encouraged to look and to ask ourselves, what could I have done to cause this? Now, I don't know for sure, because again, I'm not a prophet. I don't know for sure if that's what caused it, but it's useful. And if I come up with something, it's worth, trying to change it. Because
That's why they put the mezuzahs, a new mezuzah up. Right?
Well,
Yeah,
I
if
mean,
you're having bad luck with a lot of negative, connotation,
right.
people change their
Well,
mezuzah.
Right. Well, long before they suggested changing your mezuzah, they suggested looking and asking yourself, is there anything I've done that might have led to this?
Right.
The mezuzah one is slightly different because there it could be that you've behaved properly, but just somehow something happened to your mezuzah. So, and you would still have to, to change it. But here, so let's say I had some kind of illness. I would ask myself, let's say the illness was related to my arm. So I would ask myself, is there some mitzvah with my arm that I haven't properly fulfilled? And so I think about tefillin. Have I properly been fulfilling tefillin? Have I properly been giving tzedakah? Have I, and I go through a list of mitzvahs or that have to do with my arm, and try to, in order to try to better my circumstances. Now, again, that doesn't mean I don't go to a doctor. Of course, I go to a doctor, but that would be part of the practice that I'd be encouraged to do, and that's considered healthy.
Oh,
But
no, Rabbi, I just had a basal cell carcinoma removed from the middle of my forehead. And if I think of it that way, it's obviously my thinking that I should be examining.
No, maybe you shouldn't be frowning. I think it could be.
Oh, you're
When
right.
you laugh, when you smile, look at where you tend to scrunch up. See if it's anywhere close to frowning or smiling.
Lois, how would you think if it was near your nose?
Right, if it was.
That's a good question, Sam.
That's where the basal cells usually are, by your nasal area. It's
Yeah.
very common.
So
Right.
So each one brings interesting thinking, which would be healthy if I do it about myself. Turned on other people, it's not healthy at all. It's a very bad thing to do. I remember Moshe Shapiro once talking about the people who thought they could explain the Holocaust. He just was like, who do these people think they are? They are not prophets. Only a prophet would know, and everybody else needs to stay away from it. Because you're not a prophet, you have no idea why these things happen. And yet people find it difficult to stay away from it. All right, tomorrow, I look forward to moving on from this subject onto other subjects.
I think the button must have turned off by accident, but it was.
Okay.
Thank you.
You all
Thank
guys.
you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.